So evil Chinese scientists in a lab funded by America?
America funded it, and I think it was maybe not done with evil intentions. It was done with misguided notion that gain-of-function research was safe. And so many people
And explain gain-of-function research.
Gain-of-function is when you take a virus that exists in nature and another virus in nature, and you take part of one virus and stick it onto the other. So one of the things that they can do with coronavirus is they take an S protein, they stick it on another virus. But then they say, well, then let's see what it does to humans. Well, the thing is they sometimes create viruses that don't exist in nature that are now more infectious. They've gained the function of lethality or infectiousness by being combined in a lab. We know they were doing this, and this is one of the things that we discover in the book, and one of the things that we put out there. Fauci admits on February 1st of 2020, at the very beginning, that they're doing gain-of-function research in the Wuhan labs and that we funded it.
And the purpose of it is to let the virus thrive and then develop a vaccine, find a way to kill it.
Probably.
Just probably.
Well, take this unknown virus, they bring it back to Wuhan, 15 million people. Then they say, yeah, this is a new virus, a new coronavirus. What would happen if we mixed it with this other coronavirus? So the whole virus identification project, which has been going on for about 10 years or more, hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into this, US dollars, has been not just to identify every virus on the planet, but to identify it and then do gain-of-function research to manipulate it to see what happens. And there are legitimate scientists. There's Kevin Esvelt, who we quote in the book, from MIT, who says that basically this is a risk to civilization because we could wind up with a virus that's 50% lethal that leaks out of a lab and kills half of the planet. That literally is a possibility.
But they're not just playing around. They're trying to find ways to stop diseases.
But many scientists have now looked at this and said that we haven't found it. We've been doing this gain-of-function research for quite a while, and nobody can really point towards an exact benefit from this. The other argument against this is that when you create viruses in the lab, evolution is random. And so when a virus or a dangerous virus evolves, it does it through random mutation. And then we get an unlucky one and it takes off. If you create it in a virus in the lab, it's not random, it's man-made. And you say, oh, I'm doing this so I can discover what's going to come from nature. Well, because it's random and there are millions of different combinations that could happen, the likelihood that you create something that creates a vaccine that's going to help anybody is pretty slim to none. This controversy has been going on since before COVID. It really started in 2010 with the avian flu. The avian flu is from chickens and birds, and it's very deadly when it gets into humans, 50% mortality, but it's not very contagious. So a guy in the Netherlands said, why don't we see if we can aerosolize it, make it transmitted by air, even though it's not normally transmitted that way. And people said, that's crazy. And he did it. And then there was a discussion over whether the knowledge should be published because it might become a roadmap for terrorists to create this kind of virus. And so Anthony Fauci was on one side and Richard Ebright and the other scientists were on the other side, and they had a big war. And Anthony Fauci won, like he's won so many times. And he said in 2012, even if a pandemic occurs, if a scientist becomes infected and the community becomes infected, the knowledge is worth it. Well, that's a judgment call, and I would say there's probably 16 million families around the world who might disagree with that now. But this is a real debate that has to be had. It's all funded by government. Whether or not government should have some regulations on what they fund, I think without question we should regulate government more to have more scrutiny over this.
They are still funding gain-of-function research.
Yeah, absolutely. There's 12 different places in the United States that we do this. There are some labs that we're not even allowed to go into that we're petitioning to try to find out about this. But there's one other important thing that happened in this, and it adds to the culpability. It wasn't just a bad decision of Anthony Fauci. There was a pause between 2014 and 16. This was so dangerous, they said no more gain-of-function research. And yet it kept happening. How did they get these exempted? Our government. Our government stopped the funding of gain-of-function research from 2014 to 16. And yet many of these things in Wuhan were still going on through this. Who approved them? Well, they also set up a committee. In 2017, they turned the spigot back on. So in January of 2017, gain-of-function is now going to be funded once again. But as they turn it on, it's like they set up a committee. And this committee is supposed to see all dangerous research and say, is it dangerous? Should we let it happen? None of the Wuhan research went before there. So when I questioned Fauci in committee, he says, all my people, up and down, all 12, dozens of experts tell me it's not gain-of-function. It's like, where's the discussion? Have you ever heard of a government discussion where there's no paperwork? And why didn't it go before the committee? And then I met the person who's in charge of the safety committee. He said he only looked at 3 studies over like a 4-year period. And I said, why? He says, I didn't have the ability to go out and look at studies. It had to be self-referred. People had to volunteer. I think I'm doing gain of function research. Would you look at it? And he looked at 3, and I think they turned down 1 or 2 out of 3. But this was exempted from the safety committee. It could have only been done with Anthony Fauci's permission. I think we are eventually going to find paperwork. We haven't got it yet. We're going to find paperwork that shows that Anthony Fauci gave permission for the research to happen in Wuhan without scrutiny by the safety committee.